Chapter 47. More Tales of the Wheel. An itchy restlessness had Rand pacing beside the dining table. 12 strides. The table was exactly 12 strides long, no matter how many times he stepped it off. Irritably, he made himself stop, keeping tally. Stupid thing to be doing. I don't care how long the bloody table is. A few minutes later, he discovered that he was counting the number of trips he made up to the table and back. What is he saying to Moraine and Lan? Does he know why the Dark One is after us? Does he know which of us the Dark One wants? He glanced at his friends. Perrin had crumbled a piece of bread and was idly pushing the crumbs around on the table with one finger. His yellow eyes stared unblinking at the crumbs, but they seemed to see something far off. Matt slouched in his chair, eyes half closed, and the beginnings of a grin on his face. It was a nervous grin, not amusement. Outwardly, he looked like the old Matt, but from time to time he unconsciously touched the Shadow Logoth dagger through his coat. What is Payne telling her? What does he know? Loyal, at least, did not look worried. The Ogier was studying the walls. First he had stood in the middle of the room and stared, turning slowly in a circle. Now he was almost pressing his broad nose against the stone while he gently traced a particular join with fingers thicker than most men's thumbs. Sometimes he closed his eyes, as if the feeling was more important than seeing. His ears gave an occasional twitch, and he muttered to himself in Ogier, appearing to have forgotten anyone else was in the room with him. Lord Agelmar stood talking quietly with Nynaeve and Egwene in front of the long fireplace at the end of the room. He was a good host, adept at making people forget their troubles. Several of his stories had Egwene in giggles. Once even Nynaeve threw back her head and roared with laughter. Rand gave a start at the unexpected sound and jumped again when Matt's chair crashed to the floor. Blood and ashes! Ignoring the way Nynaeve's mouth tightened at his language. What's taking her so long? He righted his chair and sat back down without looking at anyone. His hand strayed to his coat. The Lord of Faldara looked at Matt disapprovingly. His gaze took in Rand and Perrin without any improvement, then turned back to the women. Rand's pacing had taken him close to them. My lord, Egwene was saying, as glibly as if she had been using titles all of her life. I thought he was a warder, but you call him Daishan, and talk about a golden crane banner. And so did those other men. Sometimes you sound almost as if he's a king. I remember once Moraine called him the last lord of the Seven Towers. Who is he? Nynaeve began studying her cup intently, but it was obvious to Rand that abruptly she was listening even more closely than was Egwene. Rand stopped and tried to overhear without seeming to eavesdrop. Lord of the Seven Towers, Agelmar said with a frown. An ancient title, Lady Egwene. No, even the High Lords of Tyr have older, though the Queen of Andor comes close. He heaved a sigh and shook his head. He will not speak of it, yet the story is well known along the border. He is a king, or should have been. Alan Mandragoran, Lord of the Seven Towers, Lord of the Lakes, crownless king of the Malkiri. His shaven head lifted high, and there was a light in his eye, as if he felt a father's pride. His voice grew stronger, filled with the force of his feeling. The whole room could hear without straining. We of Shinar call ourselves bordermen, but fewer than 50 years ago, Shinar was not truly the borderlands. None of us, and of Arafel, was Melkir. North of us, and of Arafel was Melkir.
The lancers of Shinar rode north, but it was Malkir that held back the blight. Malkir, peace favor her memory and the light illumine her name.
Lan is from Malkir, the wisdom said softly, looking up. She seemed disturbed, troubled. It was not a question, but Agelmar nodded.
Yes, Lady Nynaeve. He is the son of Al-Akir Mandragoran, last crowned king of the Malkiri. How did he become as he is? The beginning, perhaps, was Lane. On a dare, Lane Mandragoran, the king's brother, led his lances through the blight to blasted lands. Perhaps to Shale Ghul itself.
I'm hearing something on a microphone somewhere. No? Okay. Something is moving. Okay, never mind.
On a dare, Lane Mandragoran, the king's brother, led his lances through the blight to the blasted lands, perhaps to Shale Ghul itself. Lane's wife, Brian, made that dare. The envy that burned her heart that Al-Akir had been raised to the throne instead of Lane. The king and Lane were as close as brothers could be, as close as twins, even after the royal Al was added to Akir's name, but jealousy racked Brian. Lane was acclaimed for his deeds, and rightfully so, but not he outshine Al-Akir. He was man and king, such as comes once in 100 years, if that. Peace favor him and Eliana. Lane died in the blasted lands with most of those who followed him. Then Malkir could ill afford to lose, and Brian blamed the king, saying that Shale Ghul itself would have fallen if Al-Akir had led the rest of the Malkiri north with her husband. For revenge, she plotted with Cowan, Gemmalin, called Cowan Fairheart, to seize the throne for her son, Isam. Now Fairheart was a hero almost as beloved as Al-Akir himself, and one of the great lords. But when the great lords had cast the rods for king, only two separated him from Akir. And he never forgot that two men laying different color on the crowning stone would have set him on the throne instead. Between them, Cowan and Brian moved soldiers back from the blight to seize the Seven Towers, stripping the border forts to bare garrisons. But Cowan's jealousy ran deeper. Disgust tinged Agelmar's voice. Fairheart, the hero, whose exploits in the blight were sung throughout the borderlands, was a dark friend. With the border forts weakened, Trollocs poured into Malkir like a flood. King Al-Akir and Lane together might have rallied the land. They had done so before. But Lane's doom in the blasted lands had shaken the people, and the Trolloc invasion broke men's spirit and their will to resist. Too many men. Overwhelming numbers pushed the Malkiri back into the heartland. Brian fled with her infant son Isam and was run down by Trollocs as she rode south with him. No one knows their fate of a certainty, but it can be guessed. I can find pity only for the boy. When Cowan Fairheart's treachery was revealed and he was taken by young Jane Charon, already called Jane Farstrider. When Fairheart was brought to the Seven Towers in chains, the great lord called for his head on a pike. But because he had been second only to Al-Akir and Lane in the hearts of the people, the king faced him in single combat and slew him. Al-Akir wept when he killed Cowan. Some say he wept for a friend who had given himself to the shadow. Some say for Malkir. The Lord of Faldara shook his head sadly. The first peal of the doom of the Seven Towers had been struck. There was no time to gather aid from Shinar or Arafel, and no hope that Melkir could stand alone, with 5,000 of her lancers dead in the blasted lands, her border forts overrun. Al-Akir and his queen, El-Leana, had land brought to them in his cradle. Into his infant hands they placed the sword of the Melkiri kings, the sword he wears today. A weapon made by Aes Sedai during the War of Power, the War of the Shadow that brought down the Age of Legends. They anointed his head with oil, naming him Daishan, a diademed battle lord, and consecrated him as the next king of the Melkiri. In his name they swore the ancient oath of the Melkiri kings and queens. Agelmar's face hardened, and he spoke the words as if he too had sworn that oath, or one much similar. To stand against the shadow so long as iron is hard and stone abides. To defend the Melkiri while one drop of blood remains. To avenge what cannot be defended. The words rang in the chamber. Eliana placed a locket around her son's neck for remembrance, and the infant, wrapped in swaddling clothes by the queen's own hand, was given over to 20 chosen from the king's bodyguard, the best swordsmen, the most deadly fighters. Their command? To carry the child to Falmoran. Then did Al-Akir and El-Leana lead the Melkiri out to face the shadow one last time. There they died, Herod's Crossing, and the Melkiri died, and the 7 towers were broken. Shinar and Arafel and Kandor met the half-men and the Trollocs at the stair of Jahan, and threw them back, not as far as they had been. Most of Melkir remained in Trolloc hands, and year by year, mile by mile, the blight has swallowed it. Agelmar drew a heavy-hearted breath. When he went on, there was a sad pride in his eyes and voice. Only 5 of the bodyguards reached Falmoran alive, every man wounded. But they had the child unharmed. From the cradle, they taught him all they knew. He learned weapons as other children learned toys, and the blight as other children their mother's garden. The oath sworn over his cradle is graven in his mind. There is nothing left to defend, but he can avenge. He denies his titles, yet in the borderlands he is called the Uncrowned. And if ever he raised the golden crane of Melkir, an army would come to follow. But he will not lead men to their deaths. In the blight he courts death as a suitor courts a maiden, but he will not lead others to it. If you must enter the blight, and with only a few, there is no man better to take you there, nor to bring you safely out again. He is the best of the warders, and that means the best of the best. You might as well leave these boys here to gain a little seasoning and put your entire trust in Lan. The blight is no place for untried boys. Matt opened his mouth and shut it again. Nynaeve had listened just as wide-eyed as Egwene, but now she was staring into her cup again, her face pale. Egwene put a hand on her arm and gave her a sympathetic look. Moraine appeared in the doorway, Lan at her heels. Nynaeve turned her back on them. "What did he say?" Rand demanded. Matt rose, and Perrin too. "Country oaf," Agelmar muttered, then raised his voice to a normal tone. "Did you learn anything, Aes Sedai, or is he simply a madman?" "He is mad," Moraine said, "or close to it. But there is nothing simple about Padon Fane." One of the black and gold liveried servants bowed his way in with a blue wash basin and pitcher, a bar of yellow soap, and a small towel on a silver tray. He looked anxiously at Agelmar. Moraine directed him to put them on the table.
Your pardon for commanding your servants, Lord Agelmar, she said. I took the liberty of asking for this. Agelmar nodded to the servant, who put the tray on the table and left hurriedly. My servants are yours to command, Aes Sedai.